Well, I talked to Inmendham in his room in Stickham a little bit of Saturday night, and we had an interesting talk about willpower, which created some flexibility in me and explained to me something. Many of the people that talk about how unfree the will is, to me, seem to reveal some insight, right? Because it's certain that our traditional classical idea of will is not how we experience it. Most of our ideas of how we do experience it, those seem pretty clearly inaccurate as well. And there's a lot more difficulties in mastering the will than we think. I mean, I, for example, felt I have good willpower, and through my life, though, I've faced things where, wow, I have great willpower over here. How come I just can't muster any here? Well, it's because, oh, wait, willpower to do something you already know how to do, is that, you know, the same thing? No, as willpower to do something you don't really know how to do. So the question, to me is how do we work our will? And I see people denying freedom of will that are obviously very good at that. So that's ironic. They've seen the problems doing it, but it's funny to me because you gather up those problems so that in between the problems you can still have some sort of influence. And Gary has this, and I've been trying to figure out, well, how do I engage this part? How does the will work, illusion or not? How does it work? Because to me, the importance of something being an illusion, well, I mean, everything is an illusion. We take it one way and it really is another, and we're trying to keep improving that. So, in a sense, to me, the illusion is not the question. Degrees of illusion, perhaps, but if it's an illusion, no. The issue is the persistence of the experience. So we persistently feel this role, and what sort of an illusion that feeling of that role of making decisions is. To me, it's an important, persistent experience, and the ultimate output of a philosophical inquiry, according to my ideals, is, or would be rather, a user's manual, an operator's manual for the mind. And this is very distinct from a dogma, which is also a big book that tells you how to be in some sense. Because an operator's manual is like, well, this is a device you can use in any way you like. Let's say an infinite number, constrained but infinite number of ways. And wouldn't it be nice to have some information on how it works, how you can operate this thing? So, that holds because of the persistence of this feeling of us making choices. And Gary then expressed to me something I hadn't really gotten, but I do get through analogy, which is that the idea of the word of will has this sort of a magical connotation to him. Now, lots of things do, and I've learned not to be super sensitive on if Gary reacts to some term or idea as a phantasmagorical idea. But I do get this. I think there is a lot in our understanding of our own wills and abstraction from a deified sense of will, and perhaps that is the source metaphor even. I hadn't really thought about this because to me, the idea of God is a deification of human ideas anyway. It's like what you think, and you're going to say, oh no, some metaphysically super powerful creature believes what I happen to believe. What a coincidence. It's like Plato's forms, better example of this. Obviously Plato's forms, he's talking about ideas, and he's confused as to where they are and where they exist. Materially, if we just realize, well, they exist in the brain, it's a representational thing. Seems like it exists everywhere because we are existing inside our model of everywhere. So the mind has a chance to put ideas in places that seem like they're outside, but our experience of that is different from our visualization of the world, that our ideas are in our head wherever they feel like they are, and we understand why they could feel like they're elsewhere or coming from elsewhere. So it's really this term will, and I realized I'm not that against abandoning that as a term. It's just that I don't want to give up the project of this owner's manual for the user of a human mind. So he advocated other ideas. Thinking, that we think, that people have thinking. Really, we just got in the beginning of it, but it's sort of like perhaps will and choice are somewhat soiled terms, and I challenge him to replace him, and he's like, well, that would be arrogant of me. How can I do that? Which is, I didn't say anything, but of course, that's exactly all I do. Invent new terms that make more sense. But to me, and I don't think it means you're telling everybody to speak that way. You're just sharing these potential things. But the point is, we do have some alternative words. I was surprised that he was fine with some synonyms. Thinking and deliberation, and he's fine with the concept that the mind does all these things. So this is a way in to discuss with someone adamant about not advocating that there's a free choice, someone who's determinist, but compatibilist in a sense. How can we discuss? Well, how do we use this thing, the mind? Whatever it turns out to be. In terms of which parts are illusion and reality of our visualization of what it all means, But from our point of view as we experience it, how do we think, And I think this is good because for example, I've been talking about this ITO thing and the way of thinking versus the way of output of thinking and the way of input and the fact that everything is input. We simply notice some inputs as products of our imagination. Like if you look at something, decide to write a story about it, that the story, when you are experiencing this perceptions of the story that you're telling yourself, that's the output of the way of thinking. But other times there's outputs of way of thinking you don't really know. Because going back the chain, to me, everything is ultimately, an output of thinking to us, right? Even the color red, we know because it looks like in the real world it doesn't have that property. That property begins when the physical material event interacts with the brain, and the brain creates red. So even the raw perception of red is already the result of a way of thinking, at least materially. The brain doing some sort of processing of information, which is what we're really abstracting thinking as when we're discussing it with ITO, right? We're saying that there's this process of thinking that takes input, and so really, in a sense, anything that we could think about is going to take some input, and ultimately even input that is somehow beyond the consciousness. So it's already been output. So there's relative amounts of like the rawness of information, how processed it is. And a lot of what we're dealing with is, if someone, for example, feels that they're being put down by people a lot, but that person has a kind of a hang-up, they're just sensitive, then that means that the way of thinking that they're applying to what they really see, the real input, is producing output of them them perceiving that they're put down, but then they mistake that as actual input as if the people really are putting them down, right? And so this is, an issue of, wait, was it the input that did this? Is it my way of thinking? And then my output that I then re-ingest is where in this chain of events is this phenomena and quality coming from? And how do we influence it? So, there's these sorts of deliberations as of input, and there's really a lot of compatibility between me and those that want to criticize the concept of free will, because I don't say it's totally free, and I think it's mostly reactive. I think mostly you have a way of thinking, T, that reacts to O, and it can only react to O at the most in a couple different ways. And if there's an active dynamic will, it can only change which reaction T is going to have if they're fairly balanced to begin with. And most of the influence, I think, that we, the agent, that I, the agent, have over this process is in between times when the way of thinking isn't being employed, and I'm thinking about thinking. I'm using my self-reflective abilities to have perceptions about the way I think itself. In those times where everything is abstract and just thought, I can make influences and set things up so that the next time I'm getting really intense information and energy from the real world, and that way of thinking gets invoked, that it's already set up to sort of fall out more in the direction that I've hoped to influence in. So, yeah. So maybe there's a linguistic project here to find a neutral common ground to talk about will from the point of view of, well, it's a persistent experience and we want to know how to utilize it. Um, Now, if it's all an illusion, that won't matter so long as utilizing it means that we can do something with it. And this was one of my challenges to Mendham. Now, I've known a lot of activists, and I don't put them all in one category. You know, not all activists believe in street demonstrations and things like that. I've known conservative and liberal activists, all kinds. But mostly they tend to encourage people to realize they have a choice, because most of them think people are making a choice mistakenly. And even if they don't believe in free will, there's some truth to that. There's some way they have of talking about the choices people make, whatever they'd rather call them than a choice, or however they'd rather talk about that deliberation and thinking process. So maybe there is a linguistic solution to achieving a wider set of people to collaborate on this this concept of a philosophical work that would be a a user's manual for the user's mind, and not one of these magical ones if you could think of colors and here's what you do, or blah blah blah, or focus on your chakra. No, but just a very practical, like, oh, you want to change whether you do this? Well, depending on the physical versus mental addiction, and you can try this thing and visualize this, and it'll result in going in the direction that you desire. And I think that is quite possible. And for myself, at least, that's what I've been achieving with my philosophy, the ability to influence how I think in the future. Cheers.